welcome to Behind the Lines. I'm Diane Dayton. Today we're going to talk about popular diets. And with us right now we have Dr. Christopher Wenger. You are with the Heart Group at LGH. You're also a cardiologist and a lipid specialist. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Can I say we are what we eat? Is that accurate?
Absolutely. And sometimes we are what our food eats too.
Okay, there you go. And that's the whole premise of what we're going to talk about today. But before we get started into that, I want to say that there's no bias. You're not being paid by anybody to talk about what we're talking about today. Is that correct?
Correct. I have absolutely no disclosures, and that's a very fair question to ask. There are plenty of opportunists out there. If I'm paid by this company or that, I might say something that would, make it seem like their product is healthier or the best thing to do. But no, I'm glad you asked that. I have no disclosures today.
Okay, what is the standard American diet?
The standard American diet, that is I call it the SAD diet. And unfortunately, a standard American diet, and quite honestly, anyone can just go on Google, type in the 2015 USDA guidelines and look at what Americans eat. And Americans, on average, the American diet is a diet that has very little vegetable consumption, very little fruit consumption, very little whole grains. Most of their grains they consume are the white flour refined grains we talked about before. And the diet tends to be low in beans and other legumes, and really high, though, in added sugar, salt, and fat, most of it being trans and saturated fat.
Well, that just doesn't sound good.
It's the exact opposite of what is healthy, which is probably why we're plagued with the chronic diseases today we are.
But we can't eat our way out of it.
You eat your way into these chronic diseases, diabetes type 2, hypertension, high cholesterol, and obesity, you can certainly eat your way out. That is the treatment.
Okay. So let's talk about these, there's a high-fat, low-carb diet.
Yes, yes. There's so many, and
there's a lot.
Yeah, popular diets. In the end, they have a really neat, gimmicky name usually, and what it really comes down to, probably the best way to categorize them, as you just mentioned, are by macronutrients. So macronutrients are basically, they come in three flavors. There's fat, protein, and carbohydrate. Now, of course, the problem with this is that people don't eat macronutrients, they eat food. So a donut, for instance, is primarily a carbohydrate. So is an apple, so you can't group them together as bad carbs. But a donut is a carbohydrate, but it's also a fat, and it has a tiny bit of protein in there too. So you can see the problem with macronutrient breakdown is it's not always as obvious. So I would never tell you that a macronutrient profile would ever tell you what a person actually is eating and whether it's healthy or not. But you're right, there's only so much protein the human body can use. So that tends to be a kind of a standard in the diet. So really what it comes down to then is carbohydrates and fat. Most people either eat a high-fat, low-carbohydrate diet. Some people eat a high-carbohydrate, low-fat diet. And protein is always kind of in the middle there somewhere because you can only, again, use so much protein in the body. So we could talk about, like you said, the high-fat, low-carbohydrate diets. There's many of them. They've made quite a surgence. All kind of started back with the Atkins diet. It was released in 1972. A wild idea by Dr. Atkins at the time. In fact, they wanted to take away his medical license. And you know what? Truth be known, he was on to something. And mostly it was, and the vernacular goes, that 40, 50 years ago, we kind of demonized all fats. And what ended up happening was a surge in carbohydrate consumption. But instead of reaching for the produce foods, the produce aisle foods, people started eating lots of grains, eating lots of simple carbohydrates, sugars, and we blew up as a country. Obesity, diabetes, the high cholesterol, the high blood pressure. And so the Atkins is still there, but it's fallen out of favor and been replaced by other high-fat, low-carb diets, such as the Paleolithic diet is popular. That's Paleo diet is basically a diet that is presumed to have been the diet that we ate during 2 million years of our evolution during the Paleolithic era. I often say, well, there was about 25 million years before that, and it looks like they were herbivores, so I'm not sure why the paleo, and depending on where you're at geographically, people eat drastically different things. So it's hard to really tell you exactly what the paleo diet is as a unified definition. But for the most part, lots of animal meats, but they would really say that it's should be grass-fed meats, pasture-raised chickens. It tends to be low carbohydrates because they don't want you consuming cereal grains. No refined grains, so no donuts, Pop-Tarts, cupcakes, nothing like that, no alcohol. But snacking on seeds, nuts, and other high-protein foods. There's the Whole30 diet, which would basically, I've seen them kind of poke fun at the paleo guys, saying, hey, you're eating their paleo cereals and this and that, and they still allow more or less too much in the way of berries in there, and the sweeteners they don't agree with. And so the Whole30 diet would be an even higher fat diet than the paleo diet, so a lot more grass-fed meats and pasture-raised chicken, clean sources, as they would say. And then there's the last one I would say is the ketogenic diet, and that one is basically the highest fat of all of these diets I just mentioned. Their idea is by burning off all carbohydrates in your body, you have no more sugar or glycogen storage, and then you start using ketones for fuel. What they all have in common is you will lose weight on all of them. You can. You can improve chronic diseases with all of them. But my argument would be it's nothing magical about eating grass-fed meat or pasture-raised chicken. It's my opinion that it teaches you what real food is and what fake food is. Most people who go to a ketogenic, paleo, or Whole30 diet were coming off of a lot of refined carbohydrates, a lot of ready-made foods, frozen pizzas and burritos and simple sugar stuff, and alcohol, right? Those are common sense things. There's nothing magical about eating a higher fat diet because, quite honestly, pasture-raised or not, or grass-fed or not, eating animal flesh is going to increase your cholesterol. I'm a lipidologist. There's not a week that goes by that I don't see someone on a ketogenic diet or a paleo diet come to my office for high cholesterol, and they're concerned. And quite honestly, it's as easy as just keeping them on real food, whole foods, maybe just introducing the occasional apples and not just berries. Maybe a couple whole grains, you know, would help normalize their levels without getting too involved in the high fat intake.
Okay. Let's talk about vegetarian and vegan.
Yeah, so the opposite end of the spectrum. So they would be high carb, low fat diets. A vegetarian, basically, by strict definition, would be a plant-based eater who doesn't basically eat animals, but they will consume the products of animals. So if you were to go out today to a bookstore and buy a vegetarian cookbook, you'll see that eggs are on the menu, and so is dairy, because again, it's not animal meat, we're talking about animal products. A vegan would basically be a vegetarian who doesn't eat animal products either. Okay, they also wouldn't consume honey. A vegan is a part diet and also a part of a stance, more against animal cruelty and such. And that's the reason they won't even do honey, because the smoking of the bees and such. I like to use a term that I picked up over the years called whole food plant-based. In my clinic, I like that. It is a vegan diet, but not all vegan diets are built around whole foods. I have many vegans I care for who may be overweight or have chronic diseases because they do too much processed food, like we talked about before. So I try to get people where I can to talk about whole foods such as fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes such as beans and lentils, seeds and nuts. And the benefits there is that if you're eating whole foods and your carbs are really high fiber carbs, you're going to do just fine. You don't have to be so scared of carbohydrates either. Just like not all fats are bad, not all carbohydrates are bad, and surely there's a difference between alcohol and apples.
Okay.
Right?
A friend of mine, her son and her husband are vegan, and she was wondering whether or not her young son needs supplements, or being, a vegan, if that's okay, and as it is with what they're cooking. Yeah,
so according to the American Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, they published an awesome paper, which anyone, again, can Google online, just American Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics stance on vegan diets. Came out, I believe, 2016, if I'm not mistaken. And it turns out a properly planned and balanced vegan diet is nutritionally adequate for all walks of life and all life cycles, from infancy all the way up to geriatric age. Having said that, it assumes a couple of things. Number one, a lot of plant-based milks out there, like the soy milk, the almond milk, are fortified with vitamin B12. Most of them are getting enough B12, but that's something you want to watch out for, and if you are deficient, you take a B12 supplement. Because after all, B12 in in our omnivorous state, it's made by bacteria, and there's a lot of bacteria on the meat we eat, the red meat, the chicken, the seafood. But if you're not eating any of those animals, then you're eating a lot less animal bacteria. So if you're going to do B12, first of all, check with your doctor, see if you're deficient. You probably are not, but if you are, I would recommend just taking cyanocobalamin, which is a vitamin B12, cyano, not the methylcobalamin, and 2,500 micrograms a week is more than enough. It's dirt cheap. A bottle will last you 6 months or so, and that's easy. And then the other thing to watch out for is the EPA and DHA. It is a type of omega-3 fatty acid, particularly a long chain, and you can only get it through marine life. Studies show that our brains can shrink as we age if we're not getting enough EPA and DHA. 250 milligrams a day is all we really need to help avoid brain shrinkage. And again, if you're vegan and not having any seafood, well, you just simply eat sea vegetables, kelp, seaweed, that kind of thing. And if you're not, then you might want to consider taking maybe an algae-based supplement that has the 250 milligrams of EPA and DHA.
Okay, when we talk about balanced diets, what does that mean? So
balanced diets, you know, it's funny thinking of what a balanced diet is. I mean, what is a balanced diet? But I'll tell you, the diets that don't necessarily fit into a high-fat or high-carb diet like we just talked about might be the DASH diet and the Mediterranean diet. And they're very popular diets in the medical community. The DASH diet is an acronym, actually. It stands for the Dietary Approaches to Stop Hypertension. It was developed by Harvard's Frank Sachs more than 20 years ago. I think it just celebrated its birthday last year. And basically, it's not a no-meat diet. It's a low meat diet. So it's a lot of fruits and vegetables and legumes and seeds and nuts, but they do incorporate some fat-free or low-fat dairy and some lean cuts of meats, red and white meat. But at its core, quite honestly, it's vegetarian with a couple of small exceptions. You can call it a flexitarian if you want. That's the part-time vegetarian term people use. I think Kim Kardashian's chef is flexitarian. And then there's the Mediterranean diet, which probably has the strongest data behind it as of recent. And that's basically comes out of what people ate off the island of Crete in the early 1960s when Greeks, despite the poverty at the time, had the lowest mortality in the world. And basically, it's plant-based at its core, like all of the really heart-healthy type diets are. And so again, similar to DASH diet, the only exception is a little less in the way of red meat and white meat, and their version of protein is going to come from more of the beans, legumes, and the seafood. And they also would be a little bit more liberal than I would recommend with red wine. And also, of course, olive oil. But your viewers should know that a Mediterranean diet does not mean you just sprinkle extra virgin olive oil over everything and call it Mediterranean diet. It's still real food, plant-based mostly.
Well, we can eat our way out of situations and chronic diseases, and we're going to take a brief pause. When we come back, we're going to talk to someone who changed her life by changing her diet. Stay with us. Catch local sports every night at 8:30 on LCTV 66, your local connection. Welcome back to Behind the Lines. We're talking today about popular diets, and really we are what we eat. And we've been talking to Dr. Christopher Wenger, and now with us is Litsa Manajas. And Litsa, you are a patient of Dr. Chris's, and it was cholesterol that was an issue for you. And it was changed around by a diet, and I know you have a great story with this. But what diet did you put her on, and what is she doing?
Sure. So I really try to default to a whole food, plant-based diet. You can call it vegan, but when a patient comes in and says, hey, I'm on a vegan diet, that tells me what they don't eat. I want to know what they do. So a whole food plant-based diet is basically a diet that is just that. It's made of whole plant foods. So there's no processed junk. It's a very small, if any, role in meat-like substitutes and dairy substitutes. It's mostly fruits and vegetables, whole grains, seeds, nuts, legumes. And it's a diet that's built out of that. every meal a day and the snacks in between.
Okay. Now, Lisa, I've known you for years.
Yes, you did.
And I know your cholesterol was an issue, and you'd been going through some things with other doctors and medications, and it just wasn't the right thing. You were such an advocate for your health, and I think Dr. Chris will agree too. We do need to be advocates for ourselves. Yeah. So briefly tell us what happened and how you got to him.
Originally, when I found out my cholesterol was high, which total cholesterol was 223, but it was my LDL that was scary. It was about 180, 170, 180. And that's your bad cholesterol. So I did talk to the doctors, and they told me to go on a statin, which is what they prescribed right away. Nothing about nutrition or anything else, just take your statin and that should do it. So I took it. I knew nothing about it at the time. I took 2 weeks from it. And after 2 weeks, I felt I had the aches and the flu. I couldn't get out of bed. I was really not myself. So I called the doctor, and he said, well, it could be a statin, let's change it. So we stopped the statin that I was originally taking, but then I didn't go on another one. I started looking into ways to not be on a statin and what other ways are for me to drop my cholesterol. So I fought continuously and looking and asking until finally, after a few months, I was suggested to meet Dr. Wenger.
Yeah.
So when I went into his office, he asked me, why are you here for? And I told him I don't want to take medicine. And you told me, you're a breath of fresh air. Thank you. You did. So that gave me encouragement, thinking he's going to listen and he's going to help.
Yeah.
So that's when we started with, you know, the process of thinking about the plant-based food diet. And that's when I started it.
Because food, as we've talked in various shows, food as medicine, it can heal. And what she did in changing really did. So what was the big change that you made, Lisa? What do you eat?
Well, first of all, no dairy and no red meat in my home. And I live alone, but I feed my grandkids, my family. So I make meals for other people. But and I thought, you know what, he's right. I gave up all red meat. My yogurt, that was something, you know, I ate every single day. And I decided, you know what, all that's going to go. No cheese. Cheese was my main, I would say, I love cheese. So I was eating more cheese than I should be. So I gave up cheese, I gave up dairy, and I gave up red meat. And I started eating more salads, buying more vegetables. And I started eating pretty much the way, and I told Dr. Wenger at the beginning, this is not going to be difficult because I grew up with a Mediterranean diet. And my early years, up to age 16, I lived in Greece. So a mother that had to feed 8 children, we did not eat meat, no red meat in this house. Chicken was like something we got, a delicacy, maybe once a week. So I already knew what I had to do. So when I followed my Lent diet, I went to everything you eat when you eat Lent. Legumes, vegetables, mostly vegetables. I started eating a lot with mushrooms, making mushroom burgers, making mushroom wraps. So I never felt hungry. I felt wonderful, and the weight started dropping.
Yes.
The weight just started to go away. I was thinking, I used to look at, I need to lose 5 pounds. Well, it took 6 months and it never happened. So with this, it didn't, I mean, within a couple of weeks, I noticed that things were changing. My energy level was high. My sleep was better. I didn't stress about eating or cooking. And another issue that I had back in years ago, I was diagnosed with diverticulitis. So my fear of eating nuts and even tomatoes or anything with seeds had me from not eating what I was eating now. And flax. You made a big deal about make sure you eat flax in your diet. My breakfast now is oatmeal. And we talked about the whole grain oatmeal.
Okay.
So I do that every day. Blueberries and nuts. I start my morning with a big bowl of oatmeal, the correct size that is, with blueberries and my nuts, my flax. So that's how much, and I'm not hungry. And then my lunch could be a big salad, avocado, makes a big play, seeds, all vegetables, and I haven't had an episode of diverticulitis in a year since I started this.
Wow. Now this doesn't surprise you, but it's great to hear, isn't it?
It is, because I give the advice so often, and so few take me up on the advice. I think they think it's just another diet or won't have these kind of outcomes. But for the people who do it, I mean, this is across the board. They feel better, weight loss isn't an issue, and one thing that's absolutely apparent is cholesterol goes down. Statins are clearly defined in patients who are secondary prevention patients, people who have established vascular disease. But for those who don't and just have high cholesterol, the role of medication isn't as clearly defined. I mean, we have risk models and scoring systems that we use, but you know, we have to remember as physicians that, you know, we are permitted to give our patients at least a 6-month trial of therapeutic lifestyle changes to see if they could turn the tides in their cholesterol, in this case, through diet, through lifestyle changes, just like she has done.
Right. So her numbers have reduced dramatically, haven't they?
Absolutely.
So what are they? Her LDL's down by over 30%? Is that what you were saying earlier?
34%?
Yeah, absolutely.
30%.
Wow.
Yeah, which is the equivalent of basically 10 of Lipitor, or 5 of Crestor. You know, this is a starting dose of any statin. And keep in mind that once you're on a starting dose of statin, every time you double the statin, it reduces your cholesterol only by another 6% or so. So in her case, being a primary prevention patient, I thought it only suitable, and she seemed very motivated, that's the big key too, to try it out. And you know, I work with people to gravitate toward a whole food plant-based diet, but that's not all I do. It doesn't have to be 100% all the time. I do prescribe Mediterranean, DASH diet, even paleo in some cases, which seems on the surface like the exact opposite of what she did, but it's still getting rid of processed food, which is always the first step.
And that's really what this is all about today. And you know, when we're talking about going to the grocery store to get those real foods and to eat those things that are healthier for us. So really, what is it that we should be eating?
So it really should be, as much as possible, half a plate of vegetables with every meal. Okay, a quarter plate of protein, but really that's a big, open, ambiguous category. Protein. Mostly it would be plant-based protein, if not all plant-based protein. Plant-based proteins, of course, would be things like seeds, nuts, legumes is a staple, and don't forget that vegetables carry a lot of protein too, much more than most people realize. And then some healthy fats such as walnuts, other seeds and nuts. You may use things like olive oil, canola oil in the cooking like we talked about before, and of course fruits.
When we talked about some of these popular diets that we had listed in the first half, is there research behind this with some of the claims and how they work?
Yeah, so a whole food plant-based diet, and again, it is a vegan diet technically, but not all vegan diets are whole food plant-based, because like we talked about, a lot of processed foods sometimes are what vegans eat. So a whole food plant-based diet has lots of literature. It really got famous, well, it started back with Nathan Pritikin decades ago. Then it was picked up and studied by Dr. Dean Ornish extensively. His diet heart study in 1990 was the first of its kind to show reversal of coronary artery disease. We're not talking about taking a 70% blockage on a heart catheterization to 0%, but there was about an 8% reduction after the first year on the diet, whereas people in the control group who just kept eating their standard American diet progressed their disease by 20%.
Oh, wow.
Not to mention he published another paper, a follow-up paper 8 years later, and over 90% of the people on a whole food plant-based diet who had chronic angina were completely cured of the angina, no chest pain, no shortness of breath. And then more recently, Esselstyn and his colleagues in Cleveland Clinic showed a way to reverse heart disease through the same thing, albeit in his trial it was a whole food plant-based diet, and many of the subjects were on statins as well. But clearly lots of data. The 5 groups of people on Earth today living the longest are all whole food plant-based day to day. Loma Linda, California, home of the Seventh-day Adventists, is #1. Okinawa, Japan is #2, and so on. So it's quite amazing, the data out there.
Okay. And I know you've made a difference with your family too, and those of us who
You're around me.
and have the pleasure of, eating with you too, we benefit from what you're doing and how you're cooking as well. And thank you for doing that. I know we all
I love to
appreciate
cook.
that. I know you do, and you're a great cook with that as well too. So if we were to sum all of this up, I know medical doctors typically don't get a lot of nutrition training. Is that correct?
That's correct, myself included.
Right. So it was something that you went after to understand.
Absolutely.
Okay, so for the average person and the people that are watching, what do we need to do? What are our steps to get control of our health and what we eat?
Well, I think Michael Pollan said it beautifully, and in so few words, I can't better this statement. The rules would just basically be eat real food, not too much, mostly plants. And I would add in, if not all plants, if possible. And that is a surefire way to at least get started, and then work with your doctor, your medical provider, to maybe go over some things that maybe will be exceptions. Like if I recall, you kept some seafood in there, and that's what kept you going on the diet. And you know what? That's not a bad thing, and no one should ever feel like they have to be on any diet 100% all the time. No one really is.
Yeah, and I think we were saying earlier too, hey, if you screw up one day, there's always the next day. Get
Absolutely.
back.
Your body's an amazing machine, and remember, chronic disease doesn't happen with one poor choice. It happens with 10,000 poor choices.
Yeah, and like we said at the beginning of the show, we are what we eat. It comes out in some way, shape, or form, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so think about your choices, and what a difference. Thank you so much for what you're doing and for helping my friend too. And
It's a pleasure. It's a very satisfying way to practice.
yeah, because when I heard that she was talking to you, I thought, there we go. This is going to be good.
I said, somebody's helping me out and it's working and you need to know. And she said, I know this doctor. What are you talking about? And that's how we all started.
Yeah, and this is it. And what a difference it's making in our community. Thank you for sharing this information, and thanks so much for sharing your story too, Litsa. We'd like to say thank you for joining us today too. I'm Diane Dayton with Behind the Lines, reminding you to look behind the lines. You might be surprised what you find.